All right. We are live and Kung Fu is in my faux finish interior design. This is COFOH Live Undead. I am your host, Daniel Crosier, and I am joined by the amazing Charlie of Negative Modifier. What?
You write something on my face?
Charlie, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Not a chance I'll be able to match that energy off of that, but I'll try my best.
Well, hopefully you got some coffee or something on your end.
Yes. That I do.
Nice. Charlie, thanks for coming on this show. My producer, Lily, introduced us and, helped introduce me to the world of RPG, role-playing games and stuff. And, tell us a little bit about yourself, Charlie, where you come from and how you got into, this level of creativity and, of course, podcasting.
Yeah, I'm one of the founders and game master for the Negative Modifier podcast, tabletop RPG actual play podcast. If that does not mean anything to you yet, don't worry, we'll get to that explanation in a second. But we are people that play tabletop RPGs on the internet and record it, and you can check us out. We have a accidental horror bend lean, I guess, is the joke I have, because everything I tend to run seems to wind up going horror eventually, and at a certain point you just kind of lean into and stop fighting it. But yeah, I'm actually from the Northeast originally, which I think there are certain places that if you just grow up, you wind up with a slightly warped sense of humor because either the history of the area you're in or just like something I bring up in kind of every single one of these I do, where it's like, oh, why do you love Eldritch Horror so much? Because, as my wife pointed out to me at one point when we went back to visit my folks, I grew up in the Murderwood. Like, the house I grew up in is it looks like it's in the setting of the Blair Witch Project. I had just never put two and two together before. Oh. And, like, you get older and you think about some stuff, and I remember, like, you have weird conversations enough times, and you're like, statistically speaking, more of us should have gotten lost in the woods when I was growing up. You're absolutely right. We were idiots. And obviously did not manage to grow into an adult, but grew up playing tabletop RPGs.
Yeah.
Always enjoyed the podcasting thing, and eventually kind of became a point of like, okay, how do I merge these two? I actually took a break from tabletop RPGs and then proceeded to break my shoulder and found myself trying to find ways to fill time, and that got me back in because there was a game called Starfinder that had come out that I'd always found interesting. Not really Negative Modifier speed, but it was kind of the crack in the wall that got me back into it, which then led me to find a game called Delta Green. And Delta Green you can blame for Negative Modifier's existence. It's a truly special game for people like me that, like, me and my friends growing up spent time trying to make a game called Call of Cthulhu into Delta Green, not realizing that Delta Green, A, existed by that point in time, and B, was other people's successful attempts to turn Call of Cthulhu into the exact thing we've been trying to make. For those who don't know, Call of Cthulhu in the tabletop RPG world is it's like the books or the movies you might be familiar with. It's an eldritch horror kind of investigatory thing. That setting-wise is kind of 1920s, 1930s, typically. It's kind of old-timey. Your characters are normal, boring, everyday people that have stats like, I don't know, larceny and stuff like that. Like, you're very bad at fighting. You are a human with a human number of hit points, and the things you find yourself going up against often don't have human numbers of hit points or human amounts of ability, so it's part of the horror from that game comes from the fact you are going to die easily if you do something stupid, which kind of actually to go back to the horror genre in general, I think does a really great job of driving home the idea of it's one of the games you would use to simulate a slasher movie or something like that, where it's like, no, you're just a human and you're in a bad situation and run.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Something with anything relating to Cthulhu and Lovecraft is always the horror of the unknown, or that space horror of the unknown too. So yeah, yeah, that's pretty amazing. That like Call of Cthulhu, which I've heard of, and as so many of my watchers know, I I am just being introduced to this world of role playing games, and so I'm always really excited to learn new things. And we've had a previous guest, Matt Sprague, who talked a little bit about Call of Cthulhu and and that game, and as well as just having a love of Lovecraft. And it's always a great entry point, I think, to any new medium, or at least new to me specifically.
No, yeah, it's I think it's useful to have a kind of a shared point of entry,
Yeah.
I think, and I think in kind of one of the more interesting ways where the kind of the Eldritch horror, the Lovecraftian stuff is hard to translate to film and kind of
Right.
more kind of traditional media forms. It does really well in tabletop RPGs where it's about stories and you can kind of leave it up to people's imaginations and explain just enough to kind of drive home the idea of it's like you kind of get what you're looking at, but also you have no idea what you're looking at.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 When it comes to horror, you really cannot beat the human imagination. I mean that's gonna completely topple any type of presentation of that genre. Um, when you're working on a new campaign, and I my entry to Negative Modifier is, of course, listening so much today of the Dying Ship, which has it's more intergalactic, right? Has some pieces of horror, some pieces of horror of the unknown, but for me, it was just kind of getting lost in like the nuances of the characters, and that you guys have been creating and campaigning, and listening to some of the quick little sidebar conversations of if I roll this, if I can I move this, how can I advance to this next point, and then getting back into the character. It just seems like such a massive written out production to do these, and you guys are like doing whole campaigns that are like, at least from what I'm seeing on the podcast, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 hours of content.
Yeah, I'd have to go and check the exact numbers, but Hawthorne's Crusade is, I think, 54 roughly hour-long episodes long. It was a new episode up every week for a year.
Wow, that's got to take some dedication too. Do you ever find yourself like getting to a point it's just like, what are we doing? Let's, or losing interest and maybe wanting to switch gears and go over to a different, project or campaign?
Yes and no. It's a combination of Negative Modifier is set up in a way that lets us actually have a fair amount of variety. A lot of other actual play podcasts pick a game and stick to them.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that like easily 70% of our content is Delta Green, because we just happen to like Delta Green a lot, and I have a lot of fun writing stuff for it. There's no written rule in kind of our ideas of like we're only going to play this. Like we're gonna play kind of within reason, whatever the hell we feel like playing at the end of the day type of thing. There is some democracy that happens behind the scenes. Like there is okay, here's 5 or 6 games I'm interested in running for the podcast. Which one appeals to us when we go through that whole process? And I generally do believe variety is the spice of life when it comes to that type of stuff. So it's and I'm lucky enough that the cast and the rest of the crew is really into maybe not one game in particular, but they like what I do with tabletop RPGs. There's kind of a certain level of whatever you feel like running, we're down for to a certain extent, but also like, man, that sounds real cool. Let's do that. That sounds interesting the way you presented that. And sometimes we play stuff that I'm less interested in. Sometimes we've played stuff that I'm more interested in. And it's a balance, but it's also kind of occasionally you play stuff that your players want to play more than you, and you find your own way to have fun with it. Like that's what makes it interesting.
Nice. When you're conducting these these campaigns, are you always the game master?
For Negative Modifier, yes, so far. In other stuff I play outside of it, also frequently yes, because I do enjoy being a game master. I have been playing tabletop RPGs for a very long time by a lot of measures, and as a result, I've reached a point where there's really only a few games left I actually want to play as a player,
Yeah.
and the majority of them I'm just like I'm happy to pinch hit when someone needs an extra player or something. Like I generally enjoy playing, but I've definitely reached a point where I'm kind of honest with myself, where it's nah, you really do prefer GMing stuff unless it's very specific games that like you really want to play. You also happen to really love game mastering these games, but you also really just enjoy this game as a whole and want to play it. Like and we've about half the ones on Negative Modifier. I'm like I will run the hell out of this game. I have no interest in playing this game. But also, how about the other half? Or like, I would go either way on this. Like, I'd be happy to play in this. I'm happy to run it. Like,
Nice.
I
Yeah.
just think it's a cool game at that point.
Yeah. When you sit down to campaign, you're scripting out the adventure. Kind of going off of the tabletop content and any manual that would or book that would come with it, right?
Yeah, so we do. I think literally right now our content's 50-50 split. This year's been a lot of pre-written stuff, but yeah. So tabletop RPG content kind of comes in. I'll be broad on this one. Two categories: either it's homebrew or it's the common term is modules, which are other people have written stuff, and then you're taking that and interpreting it and kind of running them through a story someone else kind of did the research on, kind of set up the structure for. Some people are better at that than others. Like I personally find it easier to run stuff I wrote because I have all the answers. When I run stuff other people wrote, I'm very focused on making sure I accurately portray what I perceive their intent to be, and I think it's a very different set of skill sets. Like I'm much willing to make stuff up when it's something I came up with versus when someone else did, because it's like, who am I going to offend, myself at that point? It's like, no, if someone had this idea they put together and they put a lot of time into it, so let's try and make sure we kind of you want to put as much effort, at least I do, into presenting it correctly and
Right.
honestly, and being like, this is what I think is really cool about this. I hope you also think this is cool, and I wish to accurately portray this as cool and not just like, yeah, I felt tired that day and was off my game, so this section that I think is cool came across badly because
Right.
I just couldn't quite nail it. But yeah, a lot of it's research, I think. Like, I think one of the running jokes we have is that everyone who plays a couple of the games we play, specifically Delta Green, is on like 9 FBI watch lists because you find yourself just researching bizarre stuff. And that's tabletop RPGs in general. I guess like mild spoilers for Jack Frost. I had to go through, it was like 4 or 5 hours of researching the physics of what happens when you cremate a body, because I had to know if in the setting of the situation, I'm like, can this body actually be burned? I don't know based on it. What does the physics say about this? And several YouTube holes later and a bunch of Wikipedia articles, I'm like, I have come to a ruling on this. The physics are weird.
Nice. For something like Jack Frost, can you explain to the viewers, and listeners, what that game actually is?
Sure. So Jack Frost is a module by Arc Dream Publishing, the makers of the game Delta Green. Delta Green is a game where it's an offshoot originally of the Call of Cthulhu game that became its own thing. It's an investigation. In Delta Green, you are playing as federal agents of something referred to as Delta Green. I'm not going to go into the lore of this, but Delta Green's, one of its books contains one of the best alternative histories of the United States ever written type of thing. Like, it's a whole hidden history of what the U.S. events would look like if Cthulhu was in the background, making everything secretly terrible. And
wow,
the premise, it's the best way of describing it is it's kind of a little bit X-Files, a little bit Men in Black, and a little bit just kind of what life would be like if there was a government agency out there that may or may not be legitimate. It's not actively trying to make sure people don't learn about Deep Ones and the Risen Dead, and that, hey, like, if you just sell a little bit of your soul, you can live forever type of thing. And that's kind of more than you need to know to understand Delta Green, but it's very X-Filesy.
Nice.
And so Jack Frost is a module for that's written. It's a self-contained story. Everyone that reads Jack Frost thinks it's kind of like, oh, this will take like 4 or 5 sessions to get through tops. I was also one of those people. It wound up being 14-hour-ish long episodes for us. So,
wow,
yeah, it's
that is
the cast loves
the
to chew
marathon.
scenery. Yeah, not even by our standards. Like, it was one of these
Yeah.
things where kind of like I've just learned to let things play, and if they find something they want to chew, they chew it, and we go from there, and it's a lot of fun. I am lucky enough that like of the many Delta Green modules out there, I really like Jack Frost. I think it's one of the more interesting things they've come up with from Arctream. That's not one of their big campaign style things, and the fact that the rest of the cast kind of latched onto it hard and like really dug into what I think makes Jack Frost fascinating was really cool to see play out. And they, yeah, I think it's also one of the harder Delta Green modules out there to run because there's lots of moving parts to it, which as a GM I find fascinating because I like the challenge. But again, going back to the whole idea of you want to accurately portray someone's work, it's like, yeah, I could imagine this one being daunting for some people. There's a lot of here you have to kind of keep in your brain and on notes to kind of make sure it all lines up wise. And it's that's a cool one. Yeah, that one, The Dying Ship, which is for another game called Coriolis, which is put out by I think it's Swedish company. It's Swedish or no, I'm pretty sure 99% it's Swedish company called Free League, or yeah, I can't pronounce that one. They do a lot of other stuff, but they have their whole kind of signature game system, game engine called the Year Zero engine. That part of what makes that one cool is if you learn one of their games, you now know how to play 90% of all their other games because it's shared across stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, we played Coriolis, which is this kind of Mass Effect-ish, very slight touches of Eldritch horror aspects to it, but it's more of a space opera than anything else. They also just straight up make an Alien, as in like Ridley Scott's Alien.
Yeah,
the tabletop RPG. That's fantastic.
That's cool. Have you guys ever? You've played the Alien RPG then.
Yeah.
Is that a campaign that exists on Negative Modifier? I haven't scrolled through.
It's on the list. I think we've probably passed the joke a couple times that the more popular a game is, we tend to kind of shy away from it. Where it's like, from a pure podcasting perspective, we don't want to get lost in the noise. Like Alien a couple years ago was having a real moment, rightfully so. But it seemed like everyone that was doing anything horror facing was like, "We're playing Alien right now," and I'm like, "Cool."
Yeah.
We're gonna play Coriolis.
Yeah. And I mean, it might not be the best time because we've got a new Alien movie also. It's gonna hit the zeitgeist again.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wow, man. That's pretty cool. Then one thing that kind of strikes my mind is listening to you guys enact this, and to me it plays out like a radio kind of radio show play with all the story arcs and complex characters and scenarios and stuff. The only thing I'm missing is like the sound effects as a listener. But what also comes to mind is like watching people play like a video game for hours and hours and just dedicating to get through from level to level. Do you find that there's a lot of crossover, or is it particular that you really like staying in the lane of the RPGs?
One of our guys, Alex, he actually does a lot of video game streaming. I think it's a mix. I think it's because it's a podcast, there's a certain amount of deliberate style to it. We were talking about this beforehand, but the idea, like the goal for how Negative Modifier is edited, which is the goal for it basically is like it's a highly edited, but we also want you to feel like you are sitting there at the table with us. And most of what happens during a game winds up in there. Some stuff gets cut just because we flub a line or something, and like no outcomes are ever changed type of thing. What happens, but also part of the editing process is removing the minutes of silence as we all contemplate our things or check on notes and stuff, so it just flows faster and kind of it just hits faster and makes for a more enjoyable experience. I think like a thing a lot of people forget when it comes to actual play stuff is this is a edited product. Like
Yep.
you can put stuff up raw. We've done that before too. You can go check out our Twitch streams, and they're a lot of fun, but they are not necessarily an accurate representation of exactly what playing a tabletop RPG is like. We like to think we like to think Negative Modifier is closer to what that is, but still, it's like no, it's sped up a little bit because the rule clarifications are when they're useful and not one of us going, right, how much damage do shotguns do again?
Yeah, right. Yeah, when you sit down to have a campaign, I'm curious. Yeah, is it become like a kind of a marathon day where it's just you're doing the whole campaign in like one day or a couple days, or is it just kind of spread out over like weeks?
No, it's
a couple hours.
a lot of our stuff you could not record in one session just
Right.
because it's trying. The typical our recording sessions are between kind of we'll call it 3 and 4.5 hours. Kind of it's the either we get done what I prepared for it or kind of get to a good stopping point. That's where you kind of cut it off. The reality is like some people can play tabletop RPGs for endless numbers of hours. I have a max of about 4.5, 5, unless it's finale mode, and you just get tired. Like from the GMing side of it, like it is mentally taxing. Like you do just kind of get worn out because you have to kind of be, even when you're not doing it for the podcast, you still have to be on to a certain extent. There's a level of engagement that like you feel afterwards with some frequency, and in our case too, because we are maybe a tad too invested occasionally, you really feel it. Like all of us have our kind of decompression ritual for after we are done recording for the week kind of thing, where it's like, okay, yeah, it's like we have especially dark setting or kind of dark sessions. We just hang out for a couple of minutes. It's like, hey, is everyone doing okay after that? Like, man, some stuff happened, and it's we've all kind of slowly kind of figured out about each other. We all kind of like after we're done recording, sit by ourselves for about 10, 15 minutes, just processing what happened and kind of coming back to being a normal human and being like, man, this evening was interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I'd imagine it's it's definitely taxing. Just because the long time periods, being in character, having going through all that, and then but you're also as the game master, you're throwing out stuff that is completely unexpected by some of the other participants, right?
Yeah. No, it's everyone has their own style. I go on the kind of more bullet pointy list of things. Like
Okay.
there's probably some philosophy out there. There's a bunch of like this type of game master you are. I think of myself as mildly reactive, but I also have kind of a like list of like I have an outline of like, okay, here's the important stuff that like maybe I think they're gonna wind up asking. Like to use Delta Green for an example, talking to people is a big thing, and the game emphasizes the idea of like don't talk to everyone, talk to 9 important people, and it's like, okay, who are you gonna talk to? Maybe go to the police station, have 1 or 2 police officers prepared for them to talk to, and then like maybe some townies to talk to type of situation. But like you don't just have them talk to everyone at random. Have like shopkeepers be like, why are you asking me questions about the murders that keep happening on the mountains? That's weird, tourist.
Right. Yeah. Man, that's just good. Good preparation right there. Just to keep things moving along.
No, and a big part of it is prep. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we went live, I kind of was asking like listening to to the podcast and getting involved in the campaigns and in the adventure of it. And granted, there's a lot of small conversations happening. You're politicking to get from point A to point B. Cutting through bureaucracies. Figuring out like basic engineering, especially on obviously the dying ship, because it's in space and there's a lot of technical things to kind of figure out before you can get off the launch pad, so to speak. But with all those smaller details, is there ever a chance that one of the other participants can also throw you a pretty good curveball that you have to respond pretty quickly?
Absolutely, yeah. It's as much as I can kind of plan for certain events, and I also fully admit to being slightly unhinged on this topic. I will anticipate when I'm doing my prep, I'll have like a flow chart of like, okay, here's
Ooh.
5 or 6 exceedingly unlikely scenarios that
Oh,
might happen based on what's set up. Like
yeah,
it actually happened in in Hawthorne's Crusade Weirdwood, the
yeah,
chapter for that. I thought I knew how that was gonna play. I had like a whole big thing. I'm like, okay, here's like in my mind the correct ending of this. Here's how most likely how I think this will go. Here's how I think it would play. Here's like if I was playing this,
yeah,
here's how I pursue this. But I also knew I'm like, okay, there's also a chance they're gonna kind of either totally figure out this before the big reveal happens, or accidentally trigger this kind of alternative end state for this, and didn't have all the details for that fleshed out. I had enough for it to be like, okay, if this happens or kind of something within this vicinity of this happening, here's where it kind of leads, because it naturally has to lead this way. Like if you figure out who is behind this ahead of time, what does that mean? You've shaved 12 hours a day potentially off the investigations, and you have different options. Like you're just like normally Delta Green operations end with your players fleeing town because they've just burned down an apartment building or something terrible has
right,
happened and it's in the name of the greater good. In this case, they've managed to stop kind of in this case they managed to kind of get ahead of something, and it's like, okay, we stopped the next big bad thing from happening, so we have a breather. We get a chance to kind of actually like maybe leave the situation a little bit of grace, but also like, hey, we're gonna check out so and so's place.
yeah,
Oh, that was a mistake.
yeah. Not wow.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I'm trying not to give spoilers out for, but kind of like I'd equate it to like what would happen. Like you have a serial killer, and like they got in your radar, but somehow the police get ahead of the serial killer, so they stop him after
Mm,
like 2 kills, and they go, okay, we're going to his house now and see what that's like. What is that moment like? Like, what are you stepping into where it's like, okay,
right,
this is the prep for this person. Like, this
right.
is, yeah, and that's kind of just it's an oddly specific example, but yeah, there's a certain level of improv to it, and I definitely prepare more than I need to because it's always fun to have the branching paths. But yeah, there's within tabletop RPGs, it's kind of a contract of players are there to play, meaning like
Yeah,
it's like a horror movie. You have to play the horror movie because if you don't, there's no movie. You
yeah,
have to kind of touch the obviously evil artifact because if you don't, there's no game to play type of thing. And the trade off for that is game masters kind of have to do like there's a concept called the rule of cool, where if your characters come up with something interesting enough, you
mhm,
just do it occasionally. Like you don't always be a stickler for the rules. It's like the rules don't necessarily support that option, but
right.
damn, do I want to see how this plays out?
Yeah, yeah. Let's open up the floodgates. Let's see
Yeah.
where it goes. Wow,
Yeah,
that's
like the ending of how Coriolis played out was definitely one of those ones where I'm like, yeah, there's a couple rules for this, but we're just kind of spitballing this. Give me these checks that vaguely relate to this.
yeah. But it's God. It sounds so so fun and intense and so immersive. Before we went live, I was talking about my interactions with like people in the role playing game community, and seeing a lot of those activities happening at like comic cons and horror conventions and stuff, and having them come to my table as a vendor, because I do comic books and things of that nature, and they're always amazingly inquisitive. They want to know about the story and the art and the process and how you structure things and stuff. It's always a lot more in depth than just kind of the layperson or the general fan, so to
Yeah,
speak. I really find that pretty endearing. Has that been pretty much your experience?
yeah. I think it comes from a variety of places too. Like from the game master side of
Mhm.
things, anything could be inspiration. Like I've run a couple campaigns that we haven't put on negative modifier, but kind of a thing I ran for a group of friends I play with.
Yeah.
There's this goat statue in one of the Scandinavian countries that every year for the last like decade, someone has burned down. And
Oh,
yes, it's an act of vandalism. It's a
yeah.
tragedy, but at the same time, because I'm me, I'm a fan of this story where kind of it's the dark, like, will the goat survive this year? And for a Christmas thing we were doing. I'm like, wait, what if the goat has to burn? Like, what if the goat is secretly like, what if the vigilante, like, what if the person doing the act of vandalism is actually secretly like aware of the fact that it's like, no, the goat is the end of this ritual that if it succeeds will cause, I don't know, something terrible to rise from the town square's well or something like that. So, and they have to break into the town once a year to preemptively burn the goats. The ritual can't happen, and that's a story you can play with at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's really intriguing.
No, and as a result, like it's from the GM perspective, you're always looking for fun ideas. Like you're always looking for kind of like in my case, I have a long book of just like here's like ideas I've had that maybe I don't have an idea of how to use it yet, or I'm kind of trying to make it all fit together, and then something bizarre will happen. A good example would be I'm working on the next kind of our next huge Delta Green super season of like 5 chapters, multiple months, et cetera, and there was an image that was someone had a picture where they had a TV that had a burn-in of a reporter's face. They always sit in the exact same spot, and over enough years, the face had burned into the screen of the TV, and as a result, every single thing they watch has this kind of like creepy human face burned into it.
Yeah,
and I'm like, man, what if like over the span of like a decade, you spliced in one frame of footage from something, and like someone picked up on that in the editing room, and over the span of like a decade or so, they compiled like what that one frame was into a GIF, and then emailed that to someone. What would that be like? Like, is there something there? And it all came from the fact there's just this weird picture of like, man, the screen burning's nuts.
Yeah, wow, that's God, that's pretty cool. It's amazing that where the imagination just just takes you, and the story that just fabric just manifests. I remember also like obviously everybody knows Dungeons and Dragons in a lot of those campaigns. I mean they just put out a movie on it, but like I think like what was it 8-10 years ago. I was introduced to Dan Harmon's like Harmon's Quest and everything, and some of those on stage, performances, and campaigns. And I mean, hilarious, mostly comedy based and stuff, but he was still, trying to figure out, navigate, and tell a complete story on stage, in between inebriation, right? Uh, but yeah, it's interesting to see how this medium has kind of infiltrated into so much of culture, and just really good storytelling and building community.
No, yeah, it's Critical Role, Harmon Quest, a couple other shows that I'm sadly blanking. LA by Night and a couple other ones have thankfully kind of really helped force not just actual plays, but kind of tabletop RPGs into the kind of more mainstream consciousness, because they thankfully have giant production budgets that kind of let them appeal to a wider group of people. And I think it's one of those ones where kind of like tabletop RPGs, you don't have to like everything within the genre, but you can kind of find the stuff you do like, and then you kind of slowly gravitate towards certain things. Like we are not, despite having moments of comedy, we are not a comedic podcast at the end of the day. We have funny moments, like stuff happens, but like if you're tuning into a podcast to feel happy and entertained and kind of like enjoy the jokes the entire time, maybe check out Negative Modifier, but also not really our thing. I think our ad we run frequently is like, aren't you tired of all those fantasy heroics?
Right. Yeah. You guys have more of the aspects of true horror that where people are going to make mistakes, but you're going to learn some hard lessons, but also just really good storytelling. You get lost in the characters and the campaigns, and really I'm kind of thinking it's like, Charlie, when are you going to write your own novel?
I'd be lying if I said I didn't try. I've not tried a couple times, but there's something about tabletop RPGs I find infinitely easier to process through, I guess. Like, it's one of those ones where it creates a situation where you can kind of come up with an idea and make a framework and like create a shell of a story, and then your players kind of fill in the beat by beat and progress through it, if that makes any sense. Like
Right.
they provide the action for it, and a lot of game masters, I've not done this yet, but they kind of like will record the sessions and then turn what happened into a book. It's not a thing that happens all that frequently, but it's definitely a thing people have done, and some of them are pretty successful, in my understanding. Yeah, it is definitely a thing. I think it's also that also belays the like anyone could have an idea. Turning it into a 300-page cohesive thought is an immense labor of effort and
Yeah.
needs the utmost respect. Yeah, and that's one of these things where it's like, oh, but you can do this. I'm like, yeah, I can do this. It's very different though. I can like come up with like
Right.
9 references to stuff and make a framework for it. But yeah, it's my players that fill in the like, okay, so we're gonna sneak in through the sewer, and I'm sitting there being like, why are we doing this? But also, yes, where does this go?
Yeah. Right. This is that. Yeah. I guess in that respects, yeah, it makes it that much more, interesting to have all those other perspectives kind of
Yeah,
join
it's.
in.
I'm
And
not sure if you've ever worked with like a writing partner before, but it's kind of its own, it's
yeah,
a gamified kind of collaborative writing process at that point.
right. That that is true. I mean, it is a role playing game,
Yeah.
and yeah, of course, gamifying, would need to be some kind of component, and in order to propel everything forward. Yeah, it's for me it's pretty provocative. In just watching like this big community activity going on, and then you're kind of also you know kind of coming together as a wonderful troupe of talent.
Yeah,
Just
I got lucky. I knew 2 of the 3 guys from other stuff. I technically knew all 3 of them. Like it was a negative modifier was a very part chance and part like a lot of effort went into making sure it was the right people, and we had some stuff that's like, okay, like do we get along as people? Like it's the
yeah,
goal is to be kind of fun, and the goal is always this topic. Like we're still trying to have fun. Like it's one of those ones where we've had a couple campaigns that just weren't working, and it was kind of we had the conversation. I'm like, okay, this isn't working, guys. Like, are we having fun with this? And the answer ultimately was no. And like, okay, cool. We'll just shelve this. Maybe we come back to it. I can save the recordings. If we do nothing with it,
yeah,
that's fine. But also, like, let's go. Let's play something we actually want to play right now, kind of thing. Like, let's have
right,
some fun again.
right,
It's not
right.
designed to be work.
Yeah, most definitely. I guess I'd imagine if it starts feeling like work, it's just like, yeah, should we even continue?
Yeah, and it's one of those ones where kind of like it's like, what do you call work? Like, and a lot of work goes into the behind the scenes aspects of it. Like a lot of editing happens to it, and that's the parts I find fun. Like it's a different type of fun, but like
Yeah,
you can tell when a campaign's kind of gone off the rails in a bit. Maybe it's more hit the brakes where you're kind of it's like, okay, the hooks aren't landing the right way. The conversations are like, okay, it's like, are we reacting? We're just kind of like trying to find a way forward. And like I personally found that kind of once you find yourself stuck where you're trying to find a way of kicking things back into gear, it's time to have the honest conversation. Like, is this even worth finishing? And we've done that a couple times. We've been lucky enough to not have that happen a bunch, but also
right.
within tabletop RPGs, there's an infinite number of campaigns that got like a year and a half in and then just never got finished for one reason or another. And it's a tragedy, but also it just kind of happens.
Yeah. Well, can you recommend any tabletop games that you would recommend to like people just starting out?
Yeah, it's the one I always recommend to people is Tales from the Loop because it
Mm,
is very new player friendly. I think it's
okay.
one of the biggest challenges of getting people into tabletop RPGs is finding the balance between rules that make sense,
Yeah.
rules that are well written, and rules that are both defined enough but also vague enough that you don't have to kind of get bogged down in are we playing this correctly type of thing. And
Yes.
there's a concept called crunch in tabletop RPGs that basically the crunchier something is, the more rules it has. And
Ooh, okay.
Tales from the Loop kind of fits this nice stride where it's pretty low on crunch, but
Okay.
the rules it has are really nicely defined, and as a result, like they make sense. Like you're
Yeah.
looking for sixes, you roll a pool of dice, which is attribute plus skill, and if you
Mm,
get any sixes out of that, you succeed at what you're doing, and you're playing kids, so the rules are a little bit different. Where it's like it's an '80s movie simulator basically. It's
yeah.
the 80s that never was. It's inspired by a really fantastic artist named Steven Stahlhag, I think is how you pronounce his name, who does
Okay.
these super fat. It's amazing art of kind of like 80s Sweden, but there's like a dinosaur there, and it's there because there's this underground facility called the Loop that keeps ripping holes in the space-time continuum, or like the robots are rebelling because the robots are rebelling. It's got a hell of a look to it, and the book is made by Free League, and they did a really good job of kind of capturing the whimsy feels like the wrong phrase, but the spirit of like, yeah, like you're kids, it's the 80s, you're doing things, and also like, hey, maybe there's this weather device on top of a mountain that's malfunctioning that like when the humidity's wrong it causes like ruptures in space-time, and there's now a mammoth rampaging around through a Boy Scout camp, and one of your friends is grounded because they saw the mammoth while out in the woods, and rather than say, oh, my bike got crushed by a mammoth, they're lying about losing it, and their dad's punishing them for that, and you're trying to get them out of Dodge, and you're now realizing, oh no, this was a terrible idea, and you're 12 trying to deal with this. And yeah, I think just kind of the setting, the setup for it, the rules for it make it very accessible. I think it's D&D is a thing people know, so it's not a terrible first tabletop RPG. It's not one I recommend because I think it's more complex than people give it credit for with some frequency. It's got more rules than a lot of things do out there, but it's fine. It's not my preferred one, but yeah, there's the easiest place to go is to find a friend that plays already and be like, hey, can you run something for me? And that's often that takes, I think, the hardest kind of part out of it.
Nice. That's cool. What what can you tell our viewers and listeners about what Negative Modifier has in store next?
We are actually gearing up. We've begun the recording process for something called Cult. Cult Divinity Lost. It is hands down the darkest game we've run to date, and we've run some real dark stuff to date. It is. I think just looking up the images of what Cult's about explain like half of what that game is, where it's like, is that an angel bleeding out of its eyes? Yes. What is this game? An angel bleeding out of its eyes. Want to explain more? No, I do not, because this game is messed up in a variety of ways. It's inspired by the same mythology and kind of like philosophy that inspired The Matrix, where The Matrix took it kind of in a sci-fi approach. This takes it in a more cosmic horror approach, and yeah, I guess like we'll get into it. It's a game where basically reality is fake. It's created by a bunch of divine beings that are leeching your divinity out of your personhood, and occasionally people kind of get cracks through and see some stuff, and that's when the real horror starts, because it turns out the best way of getting to seeing the cracks is for some real terrible stuff to have happened to you, because you start questioning reality, and as a result, kind of like you start asking the questions of like, hey, why does all this terrible stuff happen constantly? Like, why are we stuck in this cycle of misery? Well, it's because you are actually secretly the battery for some weird eldritch god thing that's like, yes, Timmy runs the best when he's depressed all the time.
Oh God, this sounds absolutely amazing, and basically like taking a horror movie, removing the imagery completely, letting your mind just run rampant and scare the fuck out of you for like 5 or 6
if you're
hours.
a fan of Hellraiser, you're probably going to be a big fan of Cult. It's a very similar kind of vibe of what's going on with it.
Wow, I cannot wait to listen to what you guys come up with for that campaign. Yeah, any idea when listeners can expect that?
Probably next month, if not the month after that. We hit some production snags with Jack Frost that we have chosen to rectify by me not trying to be overly ambitious with my editing schedule on that. So yeah, we have something planned for this month. The thing we have planned for this month is definitely going to be goofier. It's a game called Honey Heist. It's going to be one episode. We're not doing 2 episodes of Honey Heist. It is a game where you have 2 stats, crime and bear.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, it's designed to be a one-shot. Like, we just got done doing one of our longer things, which in true Negative Modifier fashion, December 25th came to Jack Frost in the middle of April, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, of course, our stuff takes a little bit longer than I always think it's going to. But yeah, Cult, assuming all things go well, is next. That's things happen during production, though, too. As I said, it's our darkest thing we've run to date, so I've been kind of cagey about announcing it too much, aside for, we're playing it. Like, but things go wrong, and, it's always try to be fair to our players and their listeners, and, like, I've already started joking, I'm going to beef up our content warning for it, because it's like, we say these games are dark when we play them. This time, we really mean it.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds really exciting. I can't wait to listen to that. I know, so many of our viewers are going to be really interested in listening to that as well.
Hope you enjoy.
Charlie, I want to say, thank you for coming on the show and being so generous with your time and sharing, your knowledge of, RPG games. And that was a little bit redundant. But it's for me, it's always, really educational, with, bringing on guests, sharing, in things that I don't know too much about. I'm mostly just, horror films and comic books, type guy. So this is always eye opening for me.
No, it's, I've said this a couple times, Friday's the spice of life. And I grew up comic books, video games, et cetera, and it's kind of like, this has allowed me to kind of bring that stuff together in interesting ways, because it's abstract enough that you can do weird stuff without needing to, like, know how to code or paint, or kind of be able to kind of make it more tactile. But at the same time, you get your kind of messed up stories out there in your own way, if that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. And stick around for a few minutes while we sign off. But just one more thought. For people out there, this is a great way to really build creative friendships and kind of coalesce over a really creative way of storytelling too, I would think.
Yeah, there's actually never been a better time to try tabletop RPGs in some way. The online space has gotten finally robust in it. Like, it's me and a couple of my older friends that have been playing this for a while, and we were making jokes. We were like, man, like, the basics of what you can do now on the internet, we'd have killed for back in the early 2000s. We were using, like, forum chat messaging to run games. We were like, man, webcams would have been great back then.
Right. Oh, man, that sounds so cool. Oh, God, that's awesome. Cool. Thanks, Charlie. Stick around for a few minutes, but just want to say, thanks to all our sponsors, of course, to Mutiny Cafe. If you're going to start a revolution, make sure you're caffeinated. And of course, our friends at Hellfire Entertainment. Thanks for rebroadcasting us on your social media. Groovy TV, and of course, Alien Donut Films and Angela Joseph Productions. To Bill and Angela over there, thanks so much for all your support. And of course, to my producers, Lily Fisher, Amanda Armstrong, and Stefan Santa Cruz, thanks for putting up with my shit. And again, Charlie, thanks for being so generous with your time and your expertise.
No, thank you for having me. This has been great.
Yeah. And of course, to everybody out there that tuned in, be good, be kind, help each other out during tough times, and stay spooky, everybody. Till